Okay, so hello everyone. My name is Lisa Goulet, and I'm the engagement coordinator for UArctic Canadian members. I work out of Memorial University's Harris Centre, and I'll be the host for today's event. The University of the Arctic, as an introduction, is a network of universities, colleges, research institutes, and other organizations concerned with the education and research in and about the North. And we have people from all over Canada and the Arctic in this webinar today. We will begin today with the land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that the lands on which Memorial University's campuses are situated are in the traditional territories of diverse Indigenous groups. And we acknowledge with respect the histories and cultures of the Beothuk, Mi'kmaq, Innu, and Inuit of this province. We encourage everyone to reflect on these lands from where you are located and the Indigenous people for whom these lands are traditional territory. Thank you for joining us today for our presentation on maximizing engagement, collaboration, and internal promotion at UArctic in your institution. We have about 20 minutes for a panel discussion, followed by about 15 minutes where we will have the opportunity to put some of your questions forward to our speakers. To keep things simple and to make sure we can get as many questions as possible, we have enabled the Q&A function that you can find at the bottom right side of your screen. And you will be asking your question. If you ask the question in the chat, it won't be answered. So make sure you put your questions in that Q&A feature. And feel free to ask your questions throughout the entire webinar. This session is going to be recorded. For those who will have registered, you will receive a link to the event in a follow-up email. That being said, it is with my great pleasure to officially introduce our moderator, Rebecca Coho. She is the manager of Memorial University's Public Office of Engagement and leads strategy and programming related to public engagement framework. Her team is also responsible for Memorial's Cold Oceans and Northern Initiative, which provides coordination and communication to help develop and share the story of Memorial Institution's strength in cold oceans and northern research, teaching, and public engagement. Rebecca, you will now introduce the panel, who will then give a brief introduction.
Great. It's wonderful to be here, and thank you so much, Lisa, and the folks at the Harris Center for organizing this webinar. Very pleased to be here with folks from across North America and folks from much further afield than that in our participant list as well. So thank you all for being here, and I really do look forward to learning a lot from the folks we have on our panel who have plenty of experiences to share. So as Lisa said, I think that usually it's more interesting when folks actually do introduce themselves rather than going with just a strict read out bio. So we are going to share those in the chat so that if folks would like to do a little bit of, follow up or looking into perhaps where you've been in the past, they can go ahead and do that. But to get started, I'm going to ask each of you just to share your name, your situation, and also a little about what your connection with UArctic actually looks like. So I'm just going to go based on what I can see on my screen, and I'm going to welcome Jeff and ask if you could give a brief introduction.
Great, thanks very much, Rebecca. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you, depending on which time zone you're in. My name is Jeff Payne. I'm the president here at the University of Northern British Columbia. Before starting, I'd like to acknowledge that our Prince George campus, where I am located today, is on the traditional territory of the Lheidli, and very respectful and humble to be a guest on these traditional lands, which I have called home with myself and my family for almost 20 years. It's also good to hear folks from Memorial. Rebecca, you probably don't know, I spent many years at Memorial at all my degrees there, so it's always good to hear folks from Memorial. We'd like to thank the organizers for the opportunity this morning. And in terms of a short bio on me, I've been at UNBC, as I said, for 20 years in various roles. Came as a faculty member very early on in my career, and then was VP Research, which is how I got involved with UArctic, and have been president for the past 4 years. In terms of my involvement with UArctic, I've had the opportunity, as I said, through the VP Research portfolio to attend a number of the assemblies in Congress and really get to know what the UArctic was about. And then through that, in talking with folks on campus, as well as those connected with the UArctic, have really begun to deepen my sort of understanding and experience and opportunity that I see the UArctic playing, particularly as we move forward in a very complex time. So that's me in a nutshell, and looking forward to the discussion today. Back to you, Rebecca.
Great, thanks so much. I think we're going to stay with UNBC for our introductions here, and I'm actually going to pass it along to your colleague, Gary Wilson.
Good morning, everyone. Great to be here. And yeah, like Jeff had said, I'm also situated here on the traditional territory of the Kwikle-Tenay. And I've been at UNBC for about 23 years now, so a little bit longer than the Jeff, but not much. My involvement with UArctic, I've been involved as the UNBC member rep since 2008. And so I've been doing that role mainly as coordinator of the Northern Studies program here at UNBC. But more lately, I've just taken that role on alone because I stepped away from that position. One of the things that I've been involved a lot in at UArctic are the thematic networks and institutes, which are a really important part of what UArctic does in terms of bringing scholars together. So I've been involved in several of these institutes and thematic networks over the years. And I also had a role about 10 years ago organizing the assembly meeting, which was held here in Prince George. I'm very pleased and honored to be able to do that. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell. So back to you, Rebecca.
We're going to have to get all of you out of all these nutshells. I'm getting a bit concerned, in fact. Sorry, I can't help a dad joke. Yeah, so it's wonderful to hear. There's no doubt even already about the depth of experience within UArctic that we're seeing. Diane, I know that you've got plenty of experience as well, and I'd love to hear more about who you are and also your experiences within UArctic.
Well, I'll come out of the nutshell and just be the cracked nut here. So I'm Diane Hirschberg. First, I will say I sit on the traditional and unceded Dena'ina lands, and I'm on the traditional territory of the native village of Eklutna. So I've been a settler here for 21 years and truly value the amazing stewardship of these gorgeous lands that our first peoples have done for millennia. So in my university role, I'm at the University of Alaska Anchorage, and I'm director of the Institute of Social and Economic Research, and I've been a professor of education policy for 21 years. And I have been vice president academic for UArctic since 2021. I inherited that from a former chancellor who I was working with when she took on that role. And but I've been involved with UArctic really since I came to Prince George in 2014 and helped represent UAA at the assembly meeting there. And then have been pulled in at times to attend rectors meetings, assembly meetings, in a semi-official capacity for our university, but also, like Gary, very involved in thematic networks, in particular, the thematic network on teacher education for social justice and diversity, but also renewable energy and blue economy and several others, being that the work we do is so interdisciplinary at my institute.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And as I said, really looking forward to learning from each of you. And I'm sure we've got folks who are participating, perhaps who are newer in their membership, who are going to be able to learn a lot. So I think that we shall just jump into some questions. Most of them are going to be aimed at one person in particular, but I suspect that each of you may be able to also provide some input. So I think I'll start with one person in mind, but perhaps you can all be considering if there's anything that you would add or if you have any rejoinders to anything that you hear said. So we're just going to begin with the idea of the primary representatives within the structure of UArctic. That's a very important role. These are the folks from institutions who are responsible for both representing their universities at the assembly, but then also for promoting UArctic within their own organizations. Of course, this is a central role to the potential success of a member within UArctic. And so I'm very interested in hearing about how you've decided who the primary representatives ought to be. So Jeff, as a president, I'd be very interested in hearing what sort of skills, qualities, approaches, what makes an excellent representative, and what are the kind of skills and qualities that you think are key to carrying out this really crucial role within UArctic?
Great, thanks for the question, Rebecca. I think the word representative doesn't do the role justice. I see somebody in this role as a steward, a champion, a convener, a liaison individual, a conduit. And so they're not just there to sort of wave, in our case, the flag for the University of Northern British Columbia, but they're there to also ensure that the overall mission and vision of UArctic continues, and that us as a member organization is a part of that, can be a leader at certain times, but can also be a great partner or collaborator at times. In terms of here at the University of Northern British Columbia, Gary has played that role for us for many, many years before passing the torch on. And what I will say is, one of the skills and qualities, and I didn't know about UArctic because I was in the medical school before coming over into the administrative side of things. One of the key skills and qualities is somebody that is engaged in that space. I think that's really important because it goes beyond just being a representative for the university. They see the value of it. They're engaged from a research administration. So they are all fingers in to ensure that they know how they can play a role, but how they can also ensure that they move us as one of the member institutions along in that. And Gary and I have had many conversations over the years, particularly when I started as VP Research and had the opportunity to attend a number of the Congress and assemblies and really seeing the value. So you want somebody that really sees the value in what they're doing. This isn't, meant to be, I'm ticking a box, I'm a representative. And we want somebody that's more than that. And I will say, Gary and others have played that role tremendously here at the University of Northern British Columbia. Secondly to that, you want to ensure that somebody is also bringing those opportunities. As Gary said, we've had the opportunity to host and things like that. So really continue to not only just represent the mission of our institution, but also seeing where that can bring people to us to really continue to further the reach and breadth of what the UArctic is doing. It's a critical role, and it's one that I know we probably don't support enough. We need to do more. And as I said in my sort of opening remarks, I do feel, and I've had many conversations, that the Arctic has been very important. But I do feel as we crest into the next 10 to 15 years, it is going to be even more important, given geopolitical, climate change, and those types of areas, that I think the representatives and the leads from our institutions are going to play an even more important role. So I think it's an important role, an exciting role, and although we are small here at University of Northern British Columbia, we are mighty in terms of the folks that have been involved. And I'll stop there.
Thanks so much, Jeff. And I guess I'm interested, of course, on the flip side of having to find a person or looking for a person who's going to be able to propel that sort of forward movement. There is also the question of, are there going to be people at the institution who are going to be raising their hands to volunteer for this sort of a position? I'm interested as your institution's relationship with UArctic has matured. Are you seeing people coming forth and showing interest in playing more of a role within UArctic?
I think we are, to some respects. I think, we've got that core group that has been at UNBC for quite some time. Folks like Gary, Tristan Pierce, Gail Fondal, Paul Bowles, names that might resonate with some of our people in the webinar today. But I think what we need to do is, and I think this is where the onus is on me as the president and onus on the institution, is it's not just finding individuals like a Gary that has vested interest in sort of the the Arctic and the roles that it play. I think it needs to be also utilizing the UArctic to recruit and sustain areas of research and academics within our institution. And we've done that here at UNBC through some of our graduate programs and partnership opportunities that way. So it's more than just finding people, it's also retaining people in this space, but it's also building up the next generation. So I'm a firm believer that champions are phenomenal, but when the champions go, then it falls away. So we need to ensure that the sustainability of our connection to UArctic remains strong. And I do feel that's the onus on me as the president.
Right. So the idea of institutionalizing the commitment to and the relationship with UArctic beyond those kind of dedicated individuals who do get so much done within organizations like this. Great. Diane and Gary, I am going to move on to a question more focused on primary representatives. Is there anything that you would add to the sort of opening question about what does an ideal primary representative look like? Anything that either of you would add to that?
Maybe I'll just reiterate Jeff's point about the kind of personal value that UArctic has for an individual. So, I mean, when I came to UNBC in 2001, I was not an Arctic researcher. And that sort of gradually grew over time. And UArctic was a big part of that, right? I mean, obviously, a big part of it, too, were all the people at UNBC who were focused on the North and the Arctic. So I was inspired by them. But UArctic has sort of opened me up to researchers around the world, just attending meetings on a regular basis, being involved in thematic networks. That's been so helpful for me personally. And I'm sure it's the same story for many other people who have gotten involved in UArctic.
Thank you. Diane, anything you'd like to add?
No, I think one of the, because we just went through a process of appointing a new representative. And part of it was looking for somebody who not only understood UArctic, but had the mindset of how do we push out the information. I mean, one of the things about universities is that we're obviously very complex and diverse institutions. And how do you reach people? How do you get different people to understand the value of UArctic? And I think a representative who has a fairly broad focus on how to communicate with diverse audiences. We actually went with somebody in our library because of that. And she's an active member, and there's some really, really exciting, relatively new thematic networks in decolonizing metadata and so forth. So there's good work being done by the thematic networks, but also people who have that sense of how to communicate outward. I think that's very important.
That's a great point, Diane. And I do find that if you ever need someone to do a good, thorough, and creative job of anything, librarians are always a good place to start. Thanks. So we're going to move on to a question that we're initially going to put it in Gary's direction. We really are going to focus in a little bit more on those primary representatives. So Gary, the work that you're doing in your role is, likely primarily off the corner of your desk. This is something Lisa's done some work over the last year or so, chatting with folks in your position. And that seemed to be a very, very common thread in the conversations that she was having. So we have heard a lot about those capacity challenges that are faced by folks in your role. And also how that can affect the level of internal promotion that's taking place within institutions. So speaking as somebody who has experience in this role, would you be able to share some of your best practices? And I never imagined that everyone does things exactly the same way, but in your experience and the way that you do the job, what are some of your best practices for being an effective primary representative?
Well, I think the first thing is to familiarize yourself with all the people who are doing research and teaching on Northern and Arctic issues at your institution. Become familiar with those people, and regularly kind of let them know about the opportunities that are arising through UArctic, whether it's, here, there's a new thematic network that just came online. You might be interested in that. So the more familiar you are with the people and what they do, the more you can serve as kind of a matchmaker in a sense. So you're both a representative for the institution externally, but you're also an internal matchmaker and telling people about the opportunities that exist. I was assisted in this regard by a couple of things. UMBC is a small institution, so it's relatively easy to kind of know on a personal level many or all of the people who are working in the North or in the Arctic. And also we have a Northern Studies program. So the people who are involved in a Northern Studies program are usually the same group of people that are interested in things that are going on within UArctic. So that's been really helpful. I would advise, to sort of for a new rep or an existing rep to get involved in UArctic activities beyond just being the representative and attending the meetings every year or two. That way you kind of learn a lot more about how UArctic functions. So for example, I've been involved in several thematic networks and institutes, and it really gives me a good insight on UArctic, and I learned things that I didn't know, and that's been helpful. Try to attend the assembly meetings every year. I know that's difficult for many people, mainly for cost reasons, but they are invaluable to embedding you in the whole UArctic experience. That kind of face-to-face contact and the kind of informal meetings that happen outside of the regular assembly meetings or the regular panels are really helpful in terms of connecting you and networking you. I've been very fortunate at UMBC that we have a bit of a budget through the Northern Studies program to help fund my attendance at the assembly meetings. Not every year, but but a lot of years. And the last thing I'll touch on is one of the most important things that we do as member representatives is make sure that the dues are paid on a regular basis. So it's very important that you develop a system for getting those dues paid, whether it's through the Office of the President, which is the way that I do it, or the office of another senior administrator, or a program at the university. It's really important that you stay engaged and in that way as well, and help fund all of the great things UArctic is doing. So I'll leave it at that for the time being.
I am going to follow up, though. I can't resist because you have suggested a pretty comprehensive list of different things that you're doing to support this work. And, we were kind of wondering, we also know that you have a myriad of other responsibilities. What is it? How do you link the day-to-day work that you need to be done in other facets of your career with your connections to UArctic? It sounds to me like you make a lot of connections between the two. It would be great to just hear a little bit more about that.
Well, I found that I've been, as the Northern Studies coordinator, I made it a sort of a goal of mine to kind of bring all of these different organizations, Arctic and Northern organizations that UMBC is involved with under my, not my control, but I'm involved in them, right? So things like ACUNS, which is the Canadian Association for Northern Studies, NSTP, which is a federal funding program, ArcticNet, IASA, all of these other organizations that are connected, have similar goals to what UArctic is doing. I try to be involved in all of those, and you'd be surprised at how much crossover there is between those different organizations, and especially between the people involved in them. I mean, I've met many people over the years at UArctic who I also know from other organizations as well. So I think the more you can kind of bring all of those things together and work in a collaborative way, the better. But you're right. I mean, these kinds of roles are off the side of our desk. We all have other responsibilities at the university, but I actually look at it in the sense that you know, the work I do for UArctic is actually helping me in my teaching and my research and the things that I'm supposed to do as a faculty member. So I don't see it as an extra burden that I do off the side of my desk. I see it as something as integral to my to what I do on a daily basis.
Thanks so much. And I am certain that Diane could respond to that question. The next question is a question for Diane, and it's kind of related. So I think I'm going to go ahead and pose that. But if you have anything related to the previous question that you would like to include in your answer, that's wonderful as well. So you are both an assembly representative and also a VP for academics for UArctic. How do you manage your time and prioritize your tasks related to your roles in UArctic? And then another really important part of that question is, are there additional resources or support mechanisms that you would suggest or that you think UArctic could provide to help representatives and VPs thrive and be able to make the most of both their roles within their institutions, but then also within UArctic as a larger effort?
Well, I think one of the important pieces, of course, is that each institution has 2 assembly reps. So I have not been the primary, although I have, because again, like Gary pointed out, not everybody can go to every meeting. There are times when I served as the primary assembly rep at a meeting because my colleague was not able to go. We did move me out of that role because also because I moved into an administration role. It's just, you know, I had to drop a couple things. But one of the first pieces was making sure that that the university recognizes that being the assembly rep is part of your workload for service. So I think that was very important. And that gives faculty at our university at least some time that you can build to general fund to actually say, I am spending, you know, a couple hours a week or however much time is agreed upon. But the other piece, which I think goes across both of these, the last question and this one, is we have to think about, as a representative, not just communicating with other faculty, but also with our administration. So we have a university president or chancellor, I should say, our chancellor of our individual university, who comes out of politics, not academia. So he's had to learn what is UArctic, what is the value of UArctic. We have a provost who had never been involved in this sort of work. We're very lucky that right now we have a vice chancellor research who was and continues to be an active member of a thematic network, actually can articulate the value of UArctic sort of up and, you know, and across to multiple audiences. And so it's great to have that partner that I've not had before at the administrative level. And then the university, for my vice president role, there's a negotiation process with UArctic so that the university does agree to contribute some. It's pretty minimal at my university, and I'm actually involved in active, you know, fundraising efforts and outreach for both federal funding. The Canadian government providing support to UArctic actually is a great asset to us as well, because I look at our government and I say to them, look what Canada's doing. Sometimes we ignore what's happening in the Nordics, who have been amazing in supporting UArctic, but it's much harder to ignore our neighbors to the north. And so so that's a support. But I think UArctic is really thinking actively about how we support these activities. Having a North American initiative for building external funding, for actually bringing in philanthropy really is helpful. It's one of those challenges that we're a global institution that moves across very, very different systems with very different funding streams, ways of even supporting students, right? North to north, having tuition charges in North America and not having tuition in some of our Nordic countries, although it is creeping in, but to think about where do we find support so that our students can participate on an equal footing with our colleagues at other universities is really important. So I really appreciate that there's a proactive look at how we do this support across UArctic to enable everyone to have these opportunities.
Yeah, really interesting that different regions within the UArctic membership may need different approaches as well. But of course, making a lot of sense, very different approaches to universities, funding, as you mentioned, mobility, etc. So that makes a lot of sense. Jeff and Gary, is there anything that you would add related to anything that Diane has said, or coming back to the previous question related to the idea of resources, support mechanisms, or ideas for helping representatives thrive? And before we get into that, I do want to remind everybody that we are very pleased to take questions in the chat. They'll all go through the chat feature. All you need to do is click on the chat bubble there and you can enter your questions. And Lisa will pose those to our panel after we have our question and answered sort of discussion session here. I see that Jeff has something to say though, so please go ahead.
Thanks, Rebecca. Just going back to what Gary was saying and just building on what Diane was saying, what is really interesting about the UArctic, and I came across this myself because I wasn't in that space until I became a VP research. But what is really interesting to me is how we support our representatives in our institution. It's demystifying what UArctic is, because people see UArctic and they go, "Oh, it's just Arctic. It's it's all the way up there. I have no involvement in that." But that is so untrue. And as Gary said, he didn't come by way of this was a natural link, but it has expanded the lenses which he has done his own research and own academics and broadened his scope. And I think this is what UArctic does. You think of their space on Indigenous engagement with communities. You think of its space on how it does partnerships and networks. It is not just an Arctic. It cross-sects so many sectors. Diane, your point about having a librarian as your representative now, it shows that anybody within your organization can play an important role within UArctic. And it is not just for folks that are just engaged in that space. There's so much broader students. So I think it's really important for us, particularly in leadership, but to really highlight that you think this is what UArctic is, it's much, much more than that. And I think many of us are engaged in, partnerships and networking organizations. But to me, what UArctic has done, and I said this when I was meeting with Lisa, it has broadened the scope in terms of all its engagement. So we need to continue to support and champion that because it does reach far and wide. I just wanted to make that point.
Wonderful, thank you. Gary, did you have a comment on that, or shall we move to the next question?
No, I think a lot's been said there, and I agree with all of it. I mean, there's some really good points. So why don't you move on to the next question?
Sure thing, thank you. And so, Jeff, we're coming back to you. As has become very clear over the course of this conversation, it does seem that your institution has been quite successful in building strong relationships with other UArctic institutions, both in your region, Canada, North America, and then also with counterparts around the world. What do you see as the most important key to those collaborations? We've heard a lot about how important it is to jump right into UArctic and to approach it with kind of a learning and open mind about where it can take you and what it can do. What would your recommendation be to someone who's just getting started, or to an institution that is just new to the membership and kind of needs to find its legs in terms of how to make these collaborations fly? What would your recommendations be?
Thanks, Rebecca. I'll answer it on two frames. One, I'll answer it as sort of representative sort of frame. And I think, you know, for a strong partnership and collaboration, we need to ensure that it's intentional, and there is definitely bidirectionally and value-added proposition of being involved in this. You've heard I'm already biased, I do believe there is, but for those people that are just getting into this space, they do need to make sure that it does fit the value of the organization, and there is some intentionality to it. I also think there are stratifications to the representation. There's internally within your own organization, within your region. Rebecca, you mentioned sort of the North American side of things. We've got partnerships with, you know, and discussions with Memorial and Yukon and other places. So we need to, but then it goes broader than that. So it's really ensuring that the partnership has that value add. I think I'll take it then up into sort of a senior leader, VP, president. For me, you have to make sure if you're going to engage in these partnerships that it goes through the organization. It's one thing, and presidents do this great. They go, well, we'll strike this partnership, and then it goes nowhere because it wasn't embedded in the organization. Presidents have a great way of just signing documents and then they live on a shelf. No, it's got to live. And so you have to build the structures that if you're going to if you, i.e. as a president, are going to be engaged in this and support this, that you have the resources, either people or financial or structural, that are going to drive that partnership. Otherwise, it will go nowhere, and that's not what you would want. Also, I'll take it even one step further in terms of a partnership in general. To me, you know, and UArctic has definitely demonstrated this, partnerships are great when obviously as individual organizations and institutions, we are doing good things, great things. And we all have our individual strengths. But I think what UArctic has shown over the years is that as a collection, we can do things as a collaborative that we could not do as an individual institution. So really leaning in hard on that will continue to show the true value and the longevity and sustainability of where UArctic wants to go. Thanks.
Thank you. And I can't resist leaning into what you just said. I am so interested, and I think Diane mentioned the idea of Canada's investment in UArctic. Something that's so interesting about this group is that, of course, there are things that governments can do, you know, bilateral, trilateral, multilateral agreements that can achieve specific things. But I'm really interested in hearing from all of you, all three of you, what is it that an organization that UArctic, what can this type of academic facing, but not solely academic, organization achieve that is different than what we see when we're just talking about nation-to-nation collaboration? And I just came up with them. That one is not on my sheet. I just think it's interesting. So maybe whoever is able, or whoever wants to speak first to that one, please do go ahead.
Well, I mean, I think, sorry, did someone else want to go? No? Okay.
Go ahead, Gary, I'll follow.
Okay. I mean, I think, yeah, and I mean, it's really important that our governments support the work that we're doing. I think the Canadian government, for example, realizes the importance of the Arctic. We are an Arctic nation. But, you know, and certainly as a UArctic representative, you can be involved in those conversations, right? You can be involved mainly in more of an advisory role, I think, to brief senior administration presidents who are actually directly engaged in those conversations with government. And that's a really important connection. I think it's been brought up before. And I've had the opportunity to brief a number of different presidents, including Jeff, over the years on what's happening in UArctic and what are the new initiatives that are coming on board and how could UNBC be involved in those kinds of things. So, yeah, I mean, that brings you in contact with a whole other constellation of people at much senior levels, which is good for the institution, and it's also good for your own personal growth as well.
Certainly. Thank you. And Diane, I know that you've got a comment on this one as well.
Right. Well, I was thinking that, you know, the other piece with UArctic is to remember that we're a creation from the Arctic Council. We have a seat as an observer at Arctic Council meetings with the working groups. And actually, if you look at so much of the critical research done for the Arctic Council, UArctic institutions are all over it. So speaking to UNBC, the last Arctic Human Development Report, the two lead editors, one was Gail Fondal, and then the other was a faculty member at in Akureyri, again, another UArctic institution. So this there's both this tight coupling with the international diplomatic community across the Arctic, and there's also a direct opportunity for our research as UArctic members to impact policymaking at the highest level. And I think sometimes when we're organizing student exchanges and doing some of the other really things that we love that we see as academic, we sometimes lose sight of the fact that we are also a policy organization by virtue of that, and that it truly gives us opportunities that many well-known but not connected in this way institutions in the lower 48 might be I'm saying that from a very US perspective, but other institutions trying to work in the Arctic that are not part of our network, they're missing that really critical linkage.
Certainly. And Jeff, yes, it'd be great to have a follow-up from you as well.
Yeah, just building upon that, what Diane said, I think where the UArctic plays such an important role, given the number of member institutions and the number of countries that we are sitting in, I do absolutely feel that the UArctic is a calming voice in a very geopolitical hotbed. And so we come at it from a very academic research people lens, with Arctic first as opposed to nation first. And I think that is going to be really important as an anchoring foundational piece going forward. So I do feel that the UArctic can play such a prominent role given the lenses that are viewed on such intersectional sort of pieces going forward.
Thank you so much. We are going to wrap up the sort of panel section shortly. And once again, I'm kind of going off script here, but it's been a very interesting conversation, and I'm just kind of looking to connect threads where I can. Speaking of the idea of this being a sensitive time and a difficult time in many respects when it comes to so many of the areas, you look at the thematic network areas, big things are happening in each of these networks. I would be very interested in hearing what you see as the greatest, and this will be my final official question. We will move to the questions coming in from the group, and Lisa will pose some questions. But over the next 10 years, say, what do you see as the crucial opportunities, and challenges must be addressed as well, for UArctic as we move into into the next decade?
I'm happy to start. I think it's going to be ensuring that the next generation of thought leaders and change agents coming from our student body within organizations are well positioned to maximize the Arctic's benefits, also to weather the challenges that are going to come, because that is the sustainability piece. So I see that as both the biggest opportunity and the biggest challenge, but because it's going to be a very interesting time over the next 10 to 15 years.
And I'd add, I think that the generational shift, we have a lot of senior leadership that have been pretty clear that many of us are, we see our retirements on the horizon in the next few years, and making sure that institutional commitment continues regardless of who the individuals are. I think we've had some extraordinary support from institutions across the North, and how we make sure that they will continue that support. I think that's important. And then the other is, there's been some really thoughtful work done recently to look at how have we done, what are our new opportunities, and tying those both to institutions and hopefully ongoing national funding agency support, whether it's our scientific research entities or our state departments, making sure that they step up, because you hate to have to put things onto money, but it is not inexpensive to do this work. And in particular, I think, as Jeff was saying, the getting together in person and having some of those conversations in person are really valuable. And the Arctic Congress 3 weeks ago showed what can happen when people, a lot of us hadn't seen each other since before the pandemic. And I think the level of engagement, excitement, and the ideas coming out of it are really going to shape the next decade. And so we need to make sure that that work can happen.
I mean, there's some obvious answers to your question. What are the challenges moving forward? Things like climate change and geopolitical conflict and the impacts that's having on the Arctic, but also directly on the University of the Arctic, right? We've gone 2 or 3 years now without participation from our Russian colleagues because of what's happening in Ukraine. And that's been difficult for research and large research projects. Russia occupies almost half of the circumpolar north. Some people, my colleagues within UArctic, have had longstanding research programs in Russia, and that's disrupted those kinds of things. So, UArctic obviously has to be able to respond to those kinds of challenges as they arise. But I'll just go back to something Jeff said about engaging the next generation. And I see part of my role as a UArctic rep, as an Arctic scholar, not only to do research that's important to the Arctic, but also to engage and interest the next generation of Arctic scholars, especially undergraduates. And UArctic can play a role there, right? We have for a longstanding circumpolar studies program where courses are taught on issues relating to the Arctic. That's where you're going to start to capture people and capture their interest in Arctic. So, as institutions, I think, it's important that we support that sort of educational side of UArctic, whether it's at the undergraduate level, graduate level, as well as supporting faculty members and others who are involved in research networks, which are facilitated by UArctic.
Thanks, Gary. So all the more need for an emphasis on creating the interest and connections both within our institutions, between us, and within the network, certainly. I think we'll conclude the panel segment of the webinar with that. And I just really want to thank each of you. I can tell that you are deeply committed to the work of UArctic, and I really do appreciate the thought that you clearly put into your answers. Thanks, folks.
Thank you, everybody, for that awesome discussion. That was really enlightening. And I do have a couple questions to put forward to you, actually. You mentioned building a database of researchers doing research in the Arctic. How do you keep track of the Arctic research being done in your institution? And how do you become familiar with the who's who at your institution when starting from square one? Gary or Diane, would you care to take that question?
Sure, I can start since I put that on the table at the beginning. As I said, it's a lot easier at a smaller institution where you generally know everyone. Might be more difficult at a bigger university, right, where there are many different departments and many faculty members. probably my advice for someone at a larger institution is find the people who are involved in all of those different Arctic organizations as member reps, or people who are involved, and build a team of people that you can connect with, because their networks will also stretch further out. So building this kind of spider's web of networks across the university will help you. And then it's not all on you, right? You can call on someone else to help disseminate information. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I'll leave it at that. I'll let others respond now.
Okay, Rebecca, you had something to say?
Yeah, I think I can maybe put in a little bit of a larger institution perspective on the idea of knowing what's going on. As you mentioned in my bio, my office is responsible for Memorial's Cold Oceans and Northern Initiative. On the ocean side, we estimate that about 40% and up to 60% in some units of the work taking place at Memorial is oceans focused, and most often cold ocean focused as well. So we actually undertook a pretty significant inventorying process over the last year and a half. And the fact is that to get it started, it truly is a slog through a huge amount of data and working with people across the institution. So even things like pulling together committees, you don't always have to go to the very top level. We've had really great mileage connecting to manager level folks, and communications advisors, for example, often can fill in a huge amount of blanks in those situations. And the wonderful thing is that once we had the inventory there, we could start to actually kind of mobilize it. So we've been going very hard on LinkedIn, for example. And not only are we sharing other people's work, but that is uncovering more work that we didn't even know was happening in these areas. And another thing that we've done is we've taken all of that content and then we've actually created a monthly newsletter. And that just kind of gets the ball rolling. And once people see, hey, someone actually wants to know about the work that I'm doing in this area, we're finding stuff coming to us now. But it really is a matter of also, every 6 months, send out an email and say, here's what we've got. Take a look at this. Is the stuff that you're doing here, and is it there in a way that you feel good about? And that does motivate faculty to keep stuff up to date. So that's kind of what we've been up to. I'm not sure if we can share links in the chat with everybody, but if anyone is interested, maybe we could get the Oceans and Northern link to just kind of show how we've kind of turned it into a hub in the Memorial situation. I tried to share it, but it would only let me share with the panelists. And that's it for me.
Awesome. Gary, you had your hand up first.
Yeah, I'll just build on something that Rebecca just said. One of the things that we did for many years in the Northern Studies program is produce a biannual newsletter called the Northern Voice. And in that newsletter, there will be a whole bunch of information about what was happening at UNBC and in Northern Arctic research, updates on all of the organizations that we belong to. And it was just about getting the disseminating the information. Right. So I think that was very successful in trying to keeping people engaged. I would get emails from people. I saw that this happened. This conference is coming up. How can I learn more about that? And I would be able to tell them or point them in the right direction. So that's really, as a member rep, kind of bringing all, like, you get a lot of information from UArctic on a regular basis. So you want to be able to disseminate that information to your people. So whether you do that through a newsletter or just a listserv, I think that's a good strategy.
Great. And Diane?
Yeah, I just put a link in the chat, but UArctic has a data analytics thematic network and work. We just put out an updated report on funding for Arctic research, but there's a lot of opportunities with the entities we're working with, SCITE, SCITE, which all UArctic member institutions, I believe, now have access to. There are databases you can search and look at who is doing the research in your institution, as well as who they're collaborating with. And there's a lot of work being done now to look at individual thematic networks and see if we can look at all the linkages across them, because, you know, I think my teacher education, our thematic network probably has 30 institutions involved. We're quite large. And so there's some real nice opportunities to work with the UArctic staff to sometimes with Memorial's huge. Some of our, you know, UAA is not that big, but we still have no idea who is doing what across all the departments. And every time I say we need an experts page, my vice chancellor says, do you know how hard it is to keep that updated? And so let's use some of these tools we've got. The other thing I do, which is really, you know, on the lower level of technology, is at least once a year, send out an email to the entire faculty on our faculty listserv and say, are you interested in or doing work in the Arctic? And we have a Blackboard. We're still on Blackboard right now. We have a Blackboard faculty group that anybody can join, and anybody who joins it can post to it. And so we're just sharing information through that. So both really big picture and really, you know, specific to our university, there's a couple different ways to try to build stronger understandings of who's doing what across our institutions.
Excellent. Thank you so much, everybody. That's all the time we have, but did you have any closing remarks or tips or anything for those who are here participating in the webinar today to close off this session? Jeff, we'll start with you if you have anything. And
I would say if you're just putting your toe in the UArctic pond, put all the feet and everything in, it is a good space to be in. There's lots of resources, lots of opportunity, and yeah, I just encourage people to continue to stay involved, stay engaged.
great. And Gary?
Yeah, maybe just to make UArctic part of your kind of personal growth as a scholar, as well as, you know, having the role as a member representative. I think if you can marry those two things together, it'll give you a lot more, you know, more impetus really going forward, and more interest in the organization. If you see the value of it to you personally, you'll see the value of it to your colleagues and your university.
I'll just add, the UArctic staff, the secretariat, are incredibly helpful, and there's a lot of really good material up on the website. So that's the other piece. I mean, I use the promotional materials that UArctic posts, and I reach out to the secretariat quite often when it's like, I need something that'll help me explain this or that. And they are incredibly responsive, other than for the next month when people are on summer holiday, and we in the US should be. But it's a really amazing team who is there to support us. And so definitely you should not hesitate to reach out and ask for support in this work.
Excellent. And on that note, for Canadian members specifically, you have my email. You can reach out to me at any time if you need assistance for anything. That's what I'm here for. So yeah, we have come to the end of our time together. It went very quickly, but I would like to once again sincerely thank Jeff, Gary, and Diane for sharing their time and expertise with us today. Thanks to all of you out there for attending and for your questions. If you've enjoyed today's event, please check out our future UArctic webinars and events and discussions, which you will hear from through me or from the Secretariat. And that is all for today. Thank you so much, everybody. Have an excellent afternoon, morning, or evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.